Hello everybody. I recently sat down with a few folks from the Risk of Rain 2 lab to talk about, well, quite a lot of things. The entire conversation lasted well over 2 hours, and here in this video you'll find only the major topics, but condensed down to save time. I also did my best to keep the necessary context from both parties. If you are interested in watching the uncut version with all of the context, which I recommend you do, that video is over on Striker Hutassa's channel. A link to his video is in the description below. Alright, let me know if you'd like more content like this in the future, and otherwise enjoy the video. Hello.
Well, this will be fun.
Glad to be having the conversation.
Heck yeah, same here, dude. I'd very much like to talk about 6mm versus looping, because in 6mm, which is stage 6 Mithrix Monsoon, it's a completely different game even. Like Meat Hook is ridiculous on looping, but during the Mithrix fight, it does like nothing.
We talked about this briefly, you and I. Like I see that no different as Eclipse difficulty, right? It's a completely separate game mode. You're intentionally going out of your way to make sure the game functions a certain way. I agree, like 6mm, as you say, the going to Mithrix on stage 6, essentially what that is. Yeah, it's a completely different context entirely, for sure. So it makes sense, the reasonings behind why you guys value certain items over other ones. I mean, for me, like I made a guide on Eclipse, and in that guide I specifically say, this is not a regular run at all. There are so many things. Number one, there's so much context to runs in general. And then when you add specific modifiers, let's say like Eclipse difficulty or going straight to Mithrix kind of thing, like of course, yeah, it's going to change tons of context.
See, I don't really loop very much, but Europe does. Europe loops a decent amount. He's got an insane amount of hours in the game. There are other items as well, like PSG. Like you wouldn't think that would be absolutely insane in 6. Well, it's not absolutely insane, but like it's actually a very valuable item in 6mm, because the only attacks that are really going to bring you down to OSP are like Mithrix's Hammer Slam.
Yeah, undeniably, like one-shot protection is not relevant until you get to the point where things are, well, one-shotting you, you know?
Yeah, exactly, and that's insane, because like in looping runs, you might not want PSGs, because you could possibly get OSP back, but you're not going to get cap crit like 3 Harvester size. Like,
I mean, we're on the same page. I mean, I share all these opinions for Eclipse, which again, I draw the parallel between what you're doing and then Eclipse difficulty. It's pretty similar in that regard. So yeah, absolutely, I agree on all this points.
I would just like to point out that I feel like a main reason why there's what's been feeling like a major disconnect between, I'd say, maybe your fan base and the official Risk of Rain 2 Discord and the people who edit the wiki and stuff like that. I feel like a lot of your videos, I'm pretty sure you mentioned this before, you kind of make those videos about the newer players. When you search up how to unlock Loader, you have like a 2-minute video. Here's how you unlock Loader. Boom, done. You just give them the information. A lot of your ranking videos are also catered towards new players, and I feel like they're not that in-depth.
So I think I see what you're saying. So no, I don't like necessarily delve into the nitty-gritty spreadsheet type of thing. I think you might be referencing the, spreadsheets don't define the game. What I mean by that is I center my content around grabbing people's attention that just play the game, right? They're just here to play the game. The vast majority of people, I mean, you guys are the outliers, right? In any community, I think every community has the type that like to min-max things. Like this game is not like Path of Exile, for example, where the min-maxing community is probably a larger portion just due to hardcore the game is general, blah, 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 blah. Risk of Rain 2 is more of a casual game. I don't like when people make arguments like, oh, what are you trying to treat this as a competitive game, making Tierlists?
The PvE game
that's never made
does
any
not
sense.
matter.
Yeah, it's like people are always going to find ways to play the game efficiently. So I would say I cater my content towards those people that are looking to just play efficiently. I feel like my attack speed video most recently, that would be the most like kind of in-depth videos. And I have the corpse plume video. Those are my more in-depth videos. But yeah, the majority of my content would be more tailored towards just simple ways that are easily tangible, easily accessible. They're right there in front of you. Like you said, they're pretty basic. You can just pick them up, use them right away, and see some results.
My content's mostly the opposite even. Like I just started doing like the Raindrop series, which is more focused on newer players. Like I'm delving into one item specifically, but I mostly talk about very in-depth mechanics.
Sure, and this is another point. Like that content's cool. I'm all for that kind of content. It's just not something I'm particularly interested in because there's no real tangible benefit. Like, is it cool that you can use a behemoth and get 10 Desperado stacks immediately? Yeah. Is it practical? No. Like that's not going to happen
like
in the scenario we have.
In 6mm, like it's actually is kind of relevant because you can pick up a primordial cube and have a behemoth and be able to kill things because it's 6mm. Like it's not.
I mean, sure, and that would speed your stages up. Yeah, absolutely. But is that going to happen every single run? Probably not. I mean, is that something? Is it good to know? Yeah, absolutely. Just that, right? It's like a cool little trivia fact more so than an actual applicable thing that you can use every single time to just get better. So I think to loop it back, that would be where the divide is. That would be where the divide is. I mean, I've never claimed to be the authoritative source. I play the game a lot. I have a lot of knowledge on the game. and I apply it in different ways. That's always been my thing.
I still feel like there are other key differences. Like CROWDFUNDER is just absolutely busted in looping, because you want to talk about proc chains? Like that thing is insane proc chain.
Well, sure. Okay, so that opens up a whole nother can of worms. So yes, CROWDFUNDER is good, but so is everything else when you get to that point, right? Your equipment is not that useful at that point. It's more about the items that you have than anything. And yes, proc chains are king, but there are also, like, capacitor into a proc chain is going to melt your entire screen in one shot. It's not going to happen every time. The CROWDFUNDER is more consistent. That also plays into another thing where I think burst damage is way more important. I think we agree on that. Single target damage, dealing with those high threats like Malachites and Celestines and all that stuff. But dealing with those guys faster is more important than just wiping out the trash, which is usually what a low damage auto attack level proc chain is going to do, which is what the CROWDFUNDER grants you.
I don't actually know if that's true, because if you have the low consistent damage, it's going to have the same average output, so it's going to take the same amount of time. Except
not for burst damage though.
Smaller targets.
Not for burst damage. Like on average, yeah, if you fight 100 things, it's going to take the same amount of time.
Even on a larger target, right? Like if it takes 1 second versus firing like a couple times a second.
Well, I think that's an underestimate, because if you have a real capacitor with multiple crowbars, multiple ice bands, capped crit, you're gonna instantly obliterate something. Versus with a CROWDFUNDER, you would need the same thing plus a lot of bleed or some other form. It's ATGs, for example. Like you're gonna need a lot of additional stuff for a truly like single target.
I would assume it would be like ATGs and ukes and stuff.
Yeah.
Because the burst is definitely like crowbar band synergy.
Right. So that just comes back to I value being able to instantly take that target out 1 out of 5 times, 20% of the time, versus CROWDFUNDER is going to be consistent the whole time because it's mainly DPS, right? I value that chance to just obliterate everything right away, because when it comes down to it, I mean, you guys know the game. The more you loop, the more items you have, the more you just the entire screen.
That's kind of where maybe it diverges, because once you hit the point that a lot of your items are just one-shotting stuff anyways, then just dumping out as many chances for big chains as you can is
absolutely
really
but
good.
I would also argue that it doesn't matter at that point. Like, it doesn't matter what equipment you have. I could have a wood sprite and still be doing the same thing. Yes, the CROWDFUNDER works in that situation, but so does like literally everything else. And another point I want to go back to is my view on equipment, because I loop and because I rush, which we can also talk about. For me, equipment is utilized the most in the early game. Same thing as your survivor loadout. Like, those things matter the most the earlier the run is, because the later the run goes, it's all about the items. So I want the equipment that's going to do something for me now.
And this kind of gets into like my main concern with your tier list is that they're not very focused. Like, you can have a tier list for like Commando and Loader, and they'll look very, very different. Like bands on Commando, if you're playing with Suppressor Fire especially, bands are going to be way lower on your Commando priority than if you're playing Loader or Artifice.
I mean, so for like the early game, sure, but I never cater that towards just the early game. I've never mentioned it specifically, but if I had to, quantify it, I would say it's for getting as good a run as possible. That's the goal I make for my tier lists. It doesn't mean the items, they're less impactful because there are less consistent scenarios for the Commando versus the Loader, but there are still plenty of scenarios where they are useful. I say that to everybody. Like, don't worry about specific builds on each survivor, because the good items in Risk of Rain 2 are generally just good items.
I think another thing he's just trying to say is the items in general are good, and the way he ranks them are also like an average among all of the characters. It's not like Bungus is S tier because it's good on Engineer. It's more averaged amongst all the characters because it's not as great on all of the characters. I
mean, at the end of the day, there's just so much context that goes into what actually makes a run. And I've tried to make that clear since day one, that yes, the tier lists represent in large part the average, the aggregate, I guess is a better way to put it. I think before the 1.0 on my previous full tier list, I did have all of those indications of, well, not all of them, but the ones that I believe were important enough to discuss, like Bungus on Engineer or Focus Crystals on Melees. Like, they're obviously going to be more consistent in those scenarios, therefore they get a higher rank, etc., etc. I would say the tier lists are actually more for just giving new players a great way to just immediately see, okay, these are the ones that are better than other items, I guess.
I feel like something I would personally do to those tier list videos maybe is I like what you did with how you say it's S tier on this character but like worse on this character. I feel like you could do that for like categories as well. Maybe if you were going for Mithrix on the first loop 6mm and then looping and then just kind of mid game, I suppose, so the newer players also have a general idea when you want those items.
My whole thing, I think this is just a good point to cover in general, is again, I want the information to be as digestible as possible. I want you to be able to be want you to be able to look at it as a new player and immediately go, okay, that's what he means. I agree that the more context I can put in, the better. Like, I'm all for providing as much information as possible. However, in the context of a tier list that's already an hour long, like that would make it so much longer, number one. And number two, it would make it more diluted. It's more so a case of I want to make the content as accessible as possible. Now, that also means I'm going to lose information, but by you watching other videos, or especially like you just said, different items function differently on 6mm. I would say Eclipse difficulty, similar scenario, versus looping. Well, that's why I have the Eclipse guide. So if you're looking for that kind of information, then you go to the Eclipse guide where I mentioned the items that perform better and why they perform better in those scenarios.
I guess just to pivot all the way back, all the way to just equipment decisions in general. I think equipment is a lot harder to kind of average. Like something like the CROWDFUNDER, I would say, is not very good on stage 1 or 2, and debatably stage 3. Something like the Prion is usually overkill and generally not really applicable very early.
Yeah.
But I feel like because you've only got one equipment, knowing your options on when these are good, when you want to pivot, I think the CROWDFUNDER is better than a lot of people give it credit for, because it is very, very strong on stage 4 and 5. It's very strong against Mythic. And then once you start looping, it's effectively free, and it has no overhead compared to something like more bursty. I think it's a parallel maybe to Sommering, or the backup is just consistent damage.
Sure. I would say it's not as consistent because it forces you to tunnel on one specific thing. That's my big gripe with CROWDFUNDER. Yes, you can utilize it stage 4 and beyond. I'd say the sweet spot, stage 4 to stage 7-ish. That'd be the sweet spot.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, it definitely has its uses, absolutely. But I would rather take something else that I can just dump and go. The best example would be a capacitor, right? Such a low cooldown. You use it once, it's done, you wait. And Spinel Tonic, I think we could all agree Spinel Tonic is just that's going to be the best choice in every scenario.
I think the difference maybe that was construed as maybe misunderstood is a difference between something that is very good, something that has its uses, and something that is just bad. A lot of people end up misconstruing things that are someone's preference, or that have a more specific use case as just being generally bad. And you get a lot of people that will flame you for saying that it has a use even.
I'll take credit for that, because I'm assuming you're talking about the CROWDFUNDER and people hating on the CROWDFUNDER specifically. It's no secret that I don't really like the CROWDFUNDER. I have it at a C rate. So that's not a bad item. That's just, it's average. It has its cases. And obviously, like we said plenty of times by now, there's a lot of context that goes into this. It's not a C rating, period. There are times, stage 4 to 7, where it's really good, and then there are other times where it's not so good. And I guess to tie it back, it would be a couple of factors. Again, you have the tunnel vision on the same exact target, and if you deviate only even by a little bit, your shots are going to miss. So it's not like you're getting 100% uptime on the CROWDFUNDER all the time that you're using it. And especially for a newer player, knowing when to toggle it on and off, a new player is probably just going to hit it, let it go, maybe forget about it, and then they'll be like, oh crap, where's all my money? Or they won't know about the Brittle Crown interaction. So if they have a Brittle Crown, they're getting free money, then they get hit, oh, there goes all their money. So I would argue that in those situations, it's better to have something that's, you just use it, let it go, forget about it, and it comes off a cooldown, do it again. The CROWDFUNDER is not that at all. And then going back again to the early game, I would say again that equipment is most important early on. The equipment is there to enable you to get a good run, because as time goes on, I feel like your equipment slot, and especially the survivor you choose, don't actually matter at all. It's all about the items that you have. I could be playing anybody and be getting massive proc chains, and I'll clear the screen whether or not I'm playing Artificer or Acrid versus Commando or Huntress or Low. It doesn't matter at that point. So I think those two things combined, that's why I have the view that I have on CROWDFUNDER.
That's become the poster child spoken about item. But I think there are a handful of items that are just, the effect isn't quite as obvious. Something like Rose Buckler, I think, is a lot better than people give it credit for. Just because the effect isn't obvious. 30 armor being an effective 30% health up most of the time that you're running around dodging is very good. Yeah.
So I would say I agree. The Rose Buckler, 30 armor is not bad at all. I think 200 armor is 66% damage reduction. So that's a good break point to just know. That's not bad at all. However, I personally value defense as the last layer, because damage is king to me. You kill everything before they kill you. What's the threat? Nothing's a threat anymore. And then I'd value mobility, because if you dodge the hits, then you don't have to heal or block anything. Then you're healing next, because if you can just take all the damage and then instantly get it back with one-shot protection, that's another reason why I value one-shot protection, which we get into later. Of course, there are exceptions. A lot of context, surprise, like repulsion armors. I would always take a couple repulsions for burns and bleeds, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that would play into why I don't rate the Rose Buckler as high as maybe you would, because in my mind, you have to I think to everybody, you have to compare it to the other items. It's not Rose Buckler by itself in a vacuum. It's Rose Buckler versus any other green you could have got. So that's why I would say it's, it's a decent item.
So what I kind of want to talk about earlier is that one of the reasons I play 6mm is because your character matters so much more.
Yeah, I agree.
Your character like is super important. And the cool thing about 6mm is that you say that Artificer's the worst in looping. Artificer is actually one of the best characters because, hey, you know that Mithrix fight? What if I just freeze it?
Yeah, I mean, like, I reflected that in my Clips video. Yeah, I agree. Artificer's really good.
Busted. Also, another thing with Artificer is that every single proc item in this game, besides like tri-tip daggers, is total damage. So yeah, you're not proccing ATG missile a bunch of times like you will.
But when you do, it hits harder. Yeah.
But when you do, it hits insanely hard. So I don't understand.
That's the capacitor crowdfunder thing. Consistent small procs versus larger burst ones.
I don't understand why people are saying that Artificer's so bad when she has really good damage.
For consistency's sake, because I have had plenty of runs, and I'm sure you can relate too, even on stage 5, where you don't get the right items, you don't have a single band, you don't have a single pair of crit, and you're done for with Artificer. I mean, you can throw out your bomb or your spear, whatever your preference is. You can freeze stuff with your wall. You can float with whatever it's called, Ion Surge or Flamethrower. It doesn't matter. But you're going to be struggling because you don't have that consistency because the primary attack. I think that's part of the reason. So thanks to lovely Vegas Pro for corrupting my project file, this is the end of the edited conversation. Again, there is plenty more of the talk over on Striker Hutassa's channel, so check out the link in the description for that video. Thank you for watching.